Welcome to the night the bay turned to fire. The night, a pier in California, split the dark in two, and the echoes never quite stopped. July 17th, 1944. Port Chicago. A windless heat lying flat over the water. The smell of creosote and cordite, the rattle of wooden pallets sliding over splintered boards, and young men moving in patterns they did not choose. You can hear it if you lean in. The forklifts cough. The clank of shells in their crates. And then that silence, the kind that suggests the world is drawing one last breath. Before we go further, drop a comment with where you're watching from and the exact second you joined this story. Tell us what you felt in that first breath, the image that won't leave. They called it an accident, a flash, a roar, a light rising like a second sun. But the ledgers were too tidy for the human noise that followed. In the first blinding instant, the horizon went white. Windows shattered 20 miles away. The pier lifted, then vanished, and with it, more than 300 lives. Boots without feet, hats without heads. A darkness that arrived all at once and stayed. On the ground, amid ash and a rain of torn paper and burning splinters, a young sailor steadied himself against the world, salt and smoke on his tongue, voices that didn't sound like voices at all. His name will matter later. For now, he is anyone and everyone a black sailor. In navy dungarees, blue gone pale at the seams, hands raw from work nobody taught him to do safely. Loading war, for a country that hadn't learned to load respect. He stares at where the pier used to be, and there is only glare, drifting embers, shouting from men who cannot hear themselves. Somewhere a bell rings, and rings, though no one pulls the rope. They wrote a number in the morning. A count of bodies, of tons, of what was lost, but numbers could not hold what the night said. Fate unknown appears in files, as if fate were a mislaid paper, as if the right drawer could return a man. On the water ash settles like gray snow. On shore floodlights stall and hum. Rumors begin sabotage, a mistake. The wrath of physics. The wrath of God, but beneath the rumors is the steady exhale of a machine that runs without regard for the hands that feed it. Listen, you can still catch it. A hymn caught in a man's throat, then let go. A prayer rasped through gauze. A name repeated until it becomes only breath. In the glow, the dock's geometry is gone. What remains are lines on faces boys made older in an hour, and the shape of a question no officer can answer without undoing the day. Who trained them? Who didn't? Who signed? Who looked away? The war is somewhere out there on the ocean, but tonight it has come home to the pier, and nothing about it is abstract. He, the sailor we will follow, steps forward as if the ground might break again. Light scalds his eyes, paints a rim along his shoulders. Friends' jokes still hang in the air, cut off mid-laugh. Orders speak of discipline of duty, but his body knows another truth. The human instinct to refuse death when death is packaged as a task. Ash in his hair, iron on his tongue. This moment becomes a hinge. They will tell him to return to the work. The war cannot wait. Discipline, duty. He will answer not alone with something simpler. More human. Train us. Protect us. Count our lives as you count your shells. Spoken where the ground is still warm, into a wind that smells like an ending, the words won't behave like a complaint. They will behave like a beginning. July 1944. Northern California. The inland arm of the bay that locals call Suisun. Heat lying low like a blanket that forgot to lift with dawn. The shoreline is a geometry of pilings and cranes, creosote dark and tar sweet. Rails run right to the water, then vanish into the pier, as if all lines in this place must end at the same narrow strip of wood. In the distance, a hill with scrub grass. Closer, a forest of masts and derricks, cables humming like taut strings. The soundscape breathes in layers, gulls, clanks, boots on boards, orders that travel on the wind and come back thinner. Somewhere a whistle, somewhere else the long sigh of brakes as a boxcar settles its weight. It is wartime that word rearranges everything. On paper, Port Chicago is a transfer point. In the body, it is friction made visible. Munitions arrive in long teeth of steel trains, bearing crates stenciled with codes, numbers, hazards, destinations that sound like arguments with geography, Westpac. Forward areas, the war that never sleeps. On the pier, sailors move in squads, colors and roles sorted by a logic older than the war. Black enlisted men in dungarees, white officers in crisp khaki. The officers carry clipboards and responsibility. The sailors carry mass, the weight of shells, bombs, depth charges, torpedoes with their guts asleep but dreaming of chemistry. Every day, lift, swing, land, repeat. Every night, the ache that the manual never learned to speak. By the clock, the work is simple. By the body, it is a negotiation with gravity and chance. Crates creak when you take a corner too fast. Slings bite into wood. A rope shaves skin if you misjudge a catch by a fraction. Men learn to estimate danger by the pitch of a hoist, by the frown of a petty officer who has decided today is a day to prove something. Official training thin. Unofficial training, watch. The older hands feel where the balance is, count your steps. Keep your jokes timed to the lift so nobody laughs when they should be steady. They carry a war they may never see except as noise on the horizon, and yet every piece of it passes through their palms. Morning smells like creosote and coffee, a metal tang that lives at the back of the tongue. Noon adds sweat salt on denim salt in the crease of an elbow. Where a crate rested too long, the afternoon light collapses shadows. You can count splinters on the pier, each one pointing to the water, as if reminding you where a misstep will send you. On certain days, the wind dies entirely and the pier becomes an oven. On others, a wind from the delta pushes the smoke back into faces until eyes water and the world goes milky at the edges. Authority sits inside rooms with fans that cannot keep up. Maps sprawl across tables, arrows advancing toward islands whose names sound exotic until you realize they are coordinates for someone else's last hour. Schedules hang like commandments, tonnage per day, per shift, per man. A number is written on a chalkboard, and the chalk dust looks like innocence while the number itself feels like a dare. A quota is a promise to someone far away. Here on wood that flexes with every footfall, a quota is also a hand at the small of your back, always pushing. The chain of command speaks in clipped tones. Move faster. That line there, watch your swing. It also speaks in shrugs when a question rises from the deck about training, about danger, about the way a crate's straps are frayed to whisker ends. Engineers exist somewhere, manuals exist too. But books do not lift. Books do not sweat. Books do not step backward because a gut said no. Men do. And when they do, an eyebrow lifts. An officer's jaw tightens, the word discipline arrives like a stamp on a file. On-shore Liberty brief rationed. The town is neither hostile nor welcoming, just tired. A jukebox competes with the hum in the ears that heavy labor leaves behind. Some men write letters, practiced hands, careful cursive news made small and gentle for mothers and wives. Others sit outside and let the night draw some heat out of their shoulders. In the barracks, the air smells of wool and soap, and the faint electric bite of a light bulb that has taken on the language of insects. Laughter rises, nicknames, small arguments over cards. The good noise that carries a place from work camp to temporary life. But even laughter is timed. There's reveille, there's inspection, there's the rail yard calling a rhythm you can't ignore. A rumor is always present like a radio left on in another room. accidents in other ports, a loader crushed, a spark where no spark should have been. The official voice says, "We are careful." The unofficial voice says, "We are lucky until we are not." Men carry both voices inside the same chest. Some of them carry prayer, two old hymns learned in church basements, humming on the walk from barracks to pier, as if words could lay a steadying hand on a shaking world. Superstition lives here, not as theater, but as instinct. Don't speak a friend's full name when he's under a sling. Don't joke with a bomb on your shoulder. Don't step on the same loose board twice in a day. Folklore becomes procedure where procedure is thin. In a corner of this world, a man named Joe folds his sleeves once then again. The fabric shows where work holds on pale crescent moons. At the elbows, a seam thickened by salt. He is not special to the eye that's important. He is ordinary, the way a backbone is ordinary, until you try to stand without it. Late afternoon, he helps shift a pallet of 5-inch shells. The numbers aren't the point, the weight is. And he notices the new kid's hands fluttering on the line, unsure whether to pull or feed. Joe drops a word low, even. Breathe. Count. Keep your hands outside the arc. The kid nods. A small thing, a whisper against the roar, and yet in places like this, a whisper is often the difference between a bruise and a funeral. Across the water, ships wait with mouths open. Holds breathe out heat that smells like old rope and iron. Officers pace ramps with clipboards looking down the pier, as if impatience could shorten distance. The clock insists. The light refuses to obey. Dusk arrives and discovers that work has not learned to sleep. Lamps pop on one by one cones of yellow that carve out islands in the dark. Within those islands, faces rise and vanish, the whites of eyes, appearing like signals that even the signalmen cannot read. Segregation is not a policy here, so much as the air it simply is. Pay posts, promotions. Split by lines that the law drew and the war left undisturbed. Black sailors lift white officers' mark and command. It is not that every officer is cruel. Sometimes the cruelest thing is indifference. A man can be called boy by someone younger and learn to swallow heat instead of food. Complaints find their way into forms that travel the chain like bottles in a stream, bumping, circling, never arriving where thirst ends. When a white petty officer loses his temper, the echo hangs longer than the words. When a black sailor loses his breath, the echo ends at his own ribs. The pier itself learns to speak by nightfall, wood reports underfoot. Metal ticks as it cools, ropes mutter in their fibers. A gust brings the marsh into the conversation, a sweet rot that makes the mouth water and the stomach turn. Somewhere a train coupler slams thunder contained in a fist. Somewhere else someone drops a tool and 3 men stop breathing until it is clear the sound was only steel on wood. Not steel on spark, on chemistry, on widow. Sheets of paper move through offices. Requisitions of casualty rosters from other fronts. Memos about efficiency, memos about safety. Written with a flourish that suggests safety is a signature. The number X, tons per shift, is circled in red, a pulse on the page. A captain somewhere up the chain has promised someone else that Port Chicago will not be the bottleneck. A lieutenant somewhere down the chain has promised himself that his unit's numbers will sing. Between those promises lives a pier and men who think in shoulders, in palms, in nights. Between those promises lives a word the paperwork cannot print without choking risk. Men adapt the body, learns a choreography that the mind would rather not name. How to roll a crate over plank gaps without catching a heel. How to angle a sling to keep a load from penduluming into a kneecap. How to read the face of a friend and know he needs a minute even if the minute is not written into the schedule. Adaptation feels like skill, and it is until the gap where training should be becomes a canyon and the first step over it turns into a fall. By midnight on certain shifts, the pier resembles an altar light above darkness, receding offerings of effort laid out in rows. Men move with that particular fatigue that is not quite clumsiness, but near it the kind where you must tell each finger what to do. Voices drop to conserve air. Curses replace jokes because they are shorter. Officers' silhouettes cross and recross the edges of the light stick's clipboards, the cigarette ember that tells you where command is even before you hear a voice. A fog creeps from the water and thins the world to a radius of 30 feet. Inside that circle, every object is vivid. Outside, a rumor, and yet, even here, hope is a stubborn mechanic. Letters arrive. News arrives, 2 headlines that say the war might be changing shape, that in some theater far away, the lines have moved. Someone hums a tune that came from church. Everybody knows the second line. Nobody has breath for the third. Somebody says a name out loud, the name of a man who rotated out or shipped forward or simply disappeared from mess one morning with a transfer slip that did not say where. The name hangs, then settles. Work resumes. This is the place before the night that burned, not quiet, not safe, but intact. Wood still holds wood. Rope still keeps its promises. The ledger still believes in the dignity of columns and totals. And in the middle of it, a young sailor, whose hands look like a map of the last month, learns the exact sound the pier makes when a crate lands just right. He closes his eyes for a breath, ash and salt, and something like iron in the air, and then opens them again to a world that has demands and little patience. He's not thinking about changing history. He's thinking about lunch and a letter he has not finished and the way the new kid's hands steadied on the last lift. But history is already in the room, already pacing, already counting. And when it finally speaks, it will speak in the grammar of this place: weight, heat, light. And the decision when asked to step forward or to refuse. The morning after, paper begins to speak. It always does. At 0612, a teletype claws its way across a desk, cogs ink the click that turns shock into record. Explosion at Naval Magazine Port Chicago 2310 HRS. Casualties extensive, cause undetermined. The line breaks, then resumes a machine breathing through someone else's grief. A petty officer initials the strip, pins it to a board, steps back as if distance will make the words less heavy. It will not. Official voices clear their throats. Investigative board to convene. Witness statements to be collected. Secure perimeter control access. The language is careful, a lacquer poured over chaos, and yet even inside the caution numbers begin to bloom. Windows shattered as far as Vallejo. Locomotives tossed from tracks. A Liberty ship's hull bent like a tin toy. And then the number that refuses to sit still on the page, 320 dead. Perhaps more, perhaps fewer. The ledger does not like uncertainty. But the night is not finished with it. In the barracks, what is left of them? A corpsman writes down a list of names in a hand that was meant for grocery items and letters home. Some names he knows, some he has to spell twice. Some he writes and then looks up as if the air could confirm the spelling by returning the man himself. Halfway down the page he stops, draws a line, writes, "Fate unknown." He stares at the phrase. It feels like a verdict, pretending to be a placeholder. He adds a question mark. He removes it. The line remains. An officer dictates into a recorder. At 23:09, approximately, a small detonation, followed by an intense flash. Seconds later, a larger explosion of great magnitude. He describes it as if describing weather bearings, distances, wave heights that struck the shore. In his voice, a tremor he pretends is fatigue. He says accident because it is both the safest word and the one most likely to survive revision. He says handling procedures and work pace and no smoking. He does not say training. Not yet. The word hovers at the edge of the room like a moth that refuses the lamp. On the pier, chalk marks bloom around fragments, where a crate burst, where a shackle flew like a thrown star, where the planks stopped being planks and became proof. Men in white coveralls kneel measure bag label. They step carefully as if not to wake something. A camera clicks, the shutter sounds like a tiny door, closing frame after frame that will one day live in a file cabinet under a number that does not know how to feel. In the background, the bay moves as if nothing happened. Water resuming its old bargain with shoreline and wind. Fact returns to the page with a different tone by afternoon. All black loading divisions at Port Chicago. Accelerated schedules imposed. White officers with limited ordnance experience. The sentences are not accusations, not yet they are architecture. You can feel weight in them the way a beam feels weight when someone hangs a new floor from it. Another memo builds on the first reports of limited formal training in ammunition handling. Reliance on on-the-job instruction, competition between divisions noted. The word competition wears a grin in peacetime. Here it bears teeth. A witness sits on a folding chair with a bandage that peeks from under his sleeve rough fabric against rougher skin. He speaks slowly, not because he is hiding anything, but because every image he summons arrives carrying heat. We were moving the 5-inch. The slings felt thin. I mean frayed. Not yesterday, but the day before, there was talk the crane jumped, like the clutch caught wrong. He looks at his hands as if they belong to someone else. I heard a pop like a plank giving, then a bright, like a welder's kiss, only bigger. And then it was like the night came inside my head. The stenographer's keys make a quick rain of noise. She is trained to catch fragments and rebuild them into sense. But some sounds do not translate into letters. Another sailor remembers a whistle. Not the ship's a mouth whistle, human nervous, the kind a man makes to pretend he is not afraid. It was that tune from church, he says, and he hums it, the notes coming out like breath that doesn't want to be seen. The investigator writes religious hymns sung before loading. He does not write the second thing the man said that his grandmother told him, whistling at night calls spirits that are not ready to be called. Folklore has no line on the form. Folklore still attends. Here in the interstices between measurements and memos, the other layer begins to speak. Someone swears he saw a figure on the far end of the pier just before the first flash. Not a worker. Not an officer. A shape more absence than presence. The kind of shape you get when heat distorts air. Someone else says he dreamed the pier cracking 2 nights before, that he woke with his jaw clenched so tight, his gums bled a little, that he told no one. Because what do you do with a dream when the day expects your hands? An older man, Alabama-born, says he felt his left earlobe burn a family omen and thought about asking for a transfer before the end of the week. You can call these coincidences. The men who carry them do not. They carry them like pocket stones they rub smooth over time. A chaplain opens a small book and reads a psalm that seems to know more than it ought about pits and snares and voices in the night. He closes the book and lets silence do the rest. On his desk, another list, another argument with the word unknown. He writes prayers offered in the margin, as if the margin is where the important things hide. Down the hall, a doctor signs a paper that asks for more morphine. His pen hesitates over the line where the reason must be stated. He writes injury and shock, then adds burns, then adds hearing loss, then crosses out the order and writes the words in a different sequence as if changing the order could change the pain. The folklore of work returns before sundown, not the big myths, the practical ones. Never say the number of crates left out loud. You will jinx the count and the last will fight you. Tap the sling twice with your knuckle, a little percussion to tell the rope you see it. Do not laugh when a man shoulders past you with a load. Swallow the laugh and use it later when the dock is empty and night is not listening. On paper, these are superstitions. In the body, they are rules carved by experience where policy is silent. A young seaman, the new kid Joe steadied the day before, sits on a bunk with a blanket around his shoulders, though the heat is still heavy. He watches the doorway as if expecting someone to return someone who does not. He says to no one in particular, "I never saw fire move like that." His mouth forms the words again without voicing them. He touches the top of his chest where a small cross used to hang. The chain is broken. Later, when he speaks to an officer, he will describe crates walking on their corners, like animals trying to turn into something else. The officer will write load instability observed. The boy will hear nothing but the crack of a familiar plank becoming a stranger. In the town, rumors grow legs and go places. Sabotage because the mind loves a hand to blame. Carelessness because contempt is quicker than compassion. Divine judgment because some people cannot abide a world where physics alone can shatter so many families. A barber says he heard a man say he saw a light on the pier that did not belong to any lamp he knew blue and wrong. A waitress tells a customer she dreamed of broken clocks. A child wakes crying and cannot explain why the word train suddenly means something he does not want near him. Folklore obeys no jurisdiction. It finds its way into kitchens and sidewalks and the narrow space between a question and an answer that refuses to arrive. The official board reconvenes after sundown in a room that smells of paper and cigarette ends. The chair reads statements. The others nod at intervals when the script tells them to nod. Preliminary finding accidental detonation during handling operations. He pauses, lifts his eyes, waits as if expecting the sentence to refuse him. It does not yet. Another member clears his throat, says training deficiencies alleged by several witnesses. The word alleged is a thin curtain. Behind it a mess of facts shifting their weight from one foot to the other. Numbers present themselves again in that tidy way. Numbers prefer X shells per hour, Y pallets per shift. Men assigned. Tonnage is the hero of the page. Time the antagonist to be conquered. Nowhere in the math is the sentence hands, raw eyes, stung knees, shaking from a near miss. The board records schedules. Night records the way a man's spine feels when a crane operator hesitates, then overcorrects. The board records safety regulations. A sailor's memory records a laugh from 2 nights ago about not needing classes when you have backs and willpower, a laugh that sours in the mouth the morning after. A fragment of song threads the hallway, not loud, not performative, just a line or two, a voice can carry, without asking permission from ribs. Guide me, oh, thou great. The rest dissolves. In the same moment, 2 men in separate rooms write the same words in different contexts. One writes fate unknown, the other writes known unto God. These are not opposite statements. They are the same attempt to name a whole. And still, there are facts that will not be reshaped. At 2310, the night opened and opened again, brighter the second time. The East Bay felt the second opening in its teeth. A ship moored nearby leaped wood that thought itself earth thrown like a seed. A watchman on a hill turned and saw the pier become glare. He remembers the wind arriving late as if it had to get dressed for the wrong weather. These details fit neatly in the report. They do not fit neatly anywhere else. A woman in town ties a headscarf and steps outside to look at the sky. Because the light came through her window, the way morning comes, but wrong. She thinks of a cousin in uniform and a letter she meant to send and did not. She hears sirens, so many sirens, and begins to hum a tune she learned as a child without remembering the words. Later, she will say she felt a hand on her shoulder when no one was there. Later still, she will light a candle in a church whose windows admit no sea breeze, and the flame will tremble though her own hand does not. The sun sinks, comes back, sinks again the day after the blast, cannot settle on a single color. Reporters drive out, then are turned back. A headline writer in the city drafts 2 titles, then 3, then scrubs the page, waiting for a phrase that does not lie and will still be allowed to print. The word Negro turns up in copy with the blandness of a census form. The word brave appears and tries to help. Meanwhile, on the base, a man sits with his head in his hands and recites a list of names he promised himself he would never forget. The list breaks him mid-syllable, then rebuilds itself in the quiet beyond tears. And our sailor, the one we will follow, finds himself in a room with a table and 2 chairs and a pad of paper that waits for his voice. He tells the truth as he knows it, the cadence of labor, the pace pushed the rope that talked back, the laugh that hid fear, the absence of lessons that ought to have been present like air. He expects the pad to absorb the words, then do something with them. He does not know that words in rooms like this often become birds that cannot fly, because someone clipped them in the margins. Outside the pier is a negative. Where wood was, there is suggestion. Where metal sang, there is hush. A gull lands on a beam that floats like a bone. The water keeps its own counsel. And from somewhere, not a specific place, not one you could circle on a map, a story forms that is both memory and warning. Some nights it will take the shape of a shadow where no shadow should fall. Some nights it will be a draft that refuses to be explained by a door. Some nights it will be only the word unknown written again and again until it becomes a kind of prayer for the right to know. The record will proceed, pages, signatures, seals, all the gestures by which a nation says we are paying attention. The folklore will proceed alongside songs. Whispers the old belief that the dead do not leave until their names are spoken properly with care. Between record and rumor, between light and whatever comes after light, men will make a decision. To lift again or not, to step back onto a dock that learned a terrible language, or to ask finally fully for the training, the respect, the protection that should have come long before the night turned the bay to fire. Morning arrives, but it does not behave like morning. The light is the same pale slow, yet the air carries a taste that was not there yesterday, a faint iron, a rumor of ash. Men line up not because habit owns them, because habit is the only raft in a river that changed its course overnight. Roll is called names answer, then fail to answer, then are answered for by a hush that needs no explanation. A clipboard slides past, a pen hesitates, then writes anyway. The page looks full. The pier, or what is left of it, looks like a sentence with half its words burned away. Orders follow, they always do. Cleanup detail here, perimeter there. Loading operations will be reconstituted at an alternate site. The phrase alternate site, it tries to sound like geography. The men hear something else. A plan to resume the same dance on a different floor. In one barracks, a shoe squeaks on the way to the door. The sound is tiny, foolish, yet heads turn as if a fuse just hissed awake. They move trucks, buses, a train, a procession of bodies and memory, crossing a small distance that feels like a country, past fields that didn't feel the blast, past storefronts with windows that survived, past people who look away because looking is work, and there is already too much work. The new pier, another geometry of wood and steel, rises out of the water like a promise made by someone who won't have to keep it. Fresh chalk lines on deck. Fresh ropes coiled like tame snakes. Fresh stencils that say the same old things with the same old confidence: danger, no smoking. Authorized personnel only. Warnings everywhere. Training nowhere. The difference is not academic, it is the breath inside a rib cage. A briefing, a room with maps and a fan that stirs paper more than air. An officer clears his throat. Another officer clears his conscience by staring at the floor. We will resume as soon as practical. The war does not pause. He says the men are ready, as if readiness were a switch you can slap with a clipboard. A hand rises, not high, not dramatic, just enough to be polite. Sir, about training. The room notices the word and tries not to. We'll cover procedures on the deck, the officer says. Brisk, crisp hands-on is best. A laugh tries to be born and dies in a throat. It comes out as a cough. Hands-on, someone whispers, and for a second the phrase sounds like prayer and punishment at once. Mini Case 1, a test run. A small load, a short swing, a chance to say, see, safe. A crane winds, cable tightens, a pallet lifts. The spreader bar tilts a degree, then two. The operator feathers the lever, the load steadies, then wobbles just enough to print fear on four faces. Set it down. A voice says, calm, measured. The load kisses wood too hard. A corner chews a splinter. A sailor's hand flashes out to guide what never wanted his guiding. And for the length of a heartbeat, all the blood in the pier decides where to go next. Then, nothing breaks. Relief arrives like rain after static. The officer smiles too quickly, see smooth. The men do not clap. The men inventory their muscles and discover which ones are still braced. Mini Case 2, a meeting that pretends it is not one. After chow, a barracks, a door closed against the hallway. Not a crowds attract the wrong kind of attention, just the size of a circle that truth can fill. Joe stands by a locker, one hand on the metal, as if to ground a circuit. He does not give a speech. He asks questions that land like weight. What did you learn out there that you didn't already know yesterday? What happens when the next load isn't the small one? Who here can say they were trained, truly trained for this work? The answers arrive in a grammar made of silence. Throat clears. Eyes that move to the floor, then up, then back down. When voices come, they are careful. I learned to be scared earlier. I learned the crane talks back. I learned I don't want to be the next proof. Someone says, softly, we can ask. Someone else adds, we can refuse. The second sentence bumps the wall of the room and comes back louder than it went out. Mini Case 3, authority arrives in boots. A petty officer with a jaw like a tool square, useful. Unforgiving, bursts the door with his knuckles. Meeting not without me, fellas. He smiles, but his eyes write a different letter. The Navy needs you to be men. He draws out the last word, polishes it, as if manhood were something you can shame into existence. Joe nods, polite even. We aim to be petty officer. He leaves the second sentence implied. Men do not volunteer for fire without learning where the exits are. The petty officer reads implication better than he reads names. Refusal means charges. He says casual like weather. He taps the door frame twice on his way out, a habit or a warning. The wood remembers his knuckles. Pressure is not a single thing, it is a system. It arrives as scuttlebutt. They're looking at us. They think we're lazy. As paperwork. Sign here. You acknowledge assignment. As friendship that tries to pass for advice. Look, just do today, we'll figure tomorrow. It arrives as a chaplain who is torn between souls and schedules. I hear you. I truly do. But I also hear the ships waiting. It arrives as a letter from home that says nothing about the pier because a mother cannot write the word bomb next to the word son without rearranging her own lungs. Night, the kind of dark that sticks to the inside of a mouth. A weathered plank outside the barracks where men take turns breathing cooler air. They talk not about law, not about policy, about bodies and math. I've got two sisters, one says. They write me. They think I'm a clerk. I was good at baseball. Another says, you can tell by the way I catch bad news. Laughter soft, short, a gift passed around the circle. Joe listens more than he speaks. When he does speak, the words are shaped by the room, not by ego. They will say discipline. They will say war. They will say we are cowards if we ask to live. But I didn't sign to die because a man with a clipboard skipped a page. He inhales, holds it, lets it out slowly. If we stand together, they can't call every back a wall to push against. The first ask, formal, respectful, documented. A typed request for training instruction by qualified ordnance personnel. Safety briefings. Equipment inspection before resumption. Clear lines of responsibility. It is a plain paper with careful commas and the kind of periods that land like footsteps. It travels upward, hits a desk, leans against a cup, waits. A reply comes down. Not a yes, not the no, that would own itself a cloud of words that almost form consent then blow away. Pending, under review, temporary measures. Proceed prudently. The men read the letter twice, 3 times, as if the third reading might conjure a clause that did not exist a moment before. It does not. The second ask not on paper in a yard by the rails. A lieutenant young, tired, eager to be more than his rank faces. A semicircle of faces that could tilt the world if asked. I can't change the Navy, he says. But I can change the next hour. He walks them to the gear, points, names, demonstrates the sling's balance, the crane's drift, the pivot that turns a swinging load into a still one. He is not an ordnance instructor, not really yet. For 20 minutes, the room inhales and exhales easier. Then a senior voice snaps from behind, Lieutenant, your men aren't here to teach. The moment folds shut like a pocket knife. The lieutenant's mouth opens, closes. His men go back to being figures on a chart. Escalation arrives, dressed as routine. A formation called at dawn, a speech about duty, a line about the war, needing them a promise that anyone who refuses will face consequences severe and immediate. The phrase trembles on the edge of the loudspeaker, mutiny, then disappears because the word is dynamite, and no one wants to be the one who lights it. Still, it floats, a moth to every bulb. Small acts of courage do not look like drums. They look like breath held and then released as a word that risks a man's next hour. At a hatch, a sailor says to a petty officer, "Sir, I will load after training." The petty officer blinks as if he has been addressed in a language he does not speak. "You will load, now." The sailor's neck remembers a slap from childhood that taught it how to bend. He keeps it straight anyway. "Sir," after training. He expects the floor to vanish. It does not yet. 2 men behind him take a half step forward. No one taught them a geometry of solidarity the Navy did not chart. Mini case 4, the line at the gangway. 30 men, then 40, then more. The count changing because courage moves like weather. An officer steps onto a crate height, helps, and declares the work lawful, the orders clear, the danger acceptable. He says the word acceptable the way a cook says salt out of habit. A voice from the line, not Joe's. Another asks, "Acceptable to whom, sir?" The question is not loud. The question is artillery anyway. The officer chews his next sentence before spitting it. "To the service," he answers. A low murmur travels the line, like surf over stones. The service, the service. The word can hold ships and guns and flags. Can it hold the weight of a man who prefers his heart inside his chest? The first break, 5 men peel off, faces tight as rope, climb the gangway. Not betrayal, hunger and fear, and a hope that maybe today is the day nothing goes wrong. Another dozen hold. A third dozen look at their boots, each eye creating its own weather. Joe steps into the space between decision and regret. "No shame either way," he says, even honest. "But if you go, ask for what we asked out loud, so the deck hears it." One of the 5 pauses, turns, nods, and the nod writes itself in the air where the loudspeaker can't reach. Authority hardens anyone who does not step forward will be confined, charged. A phrase recited from a manual that thought only of ships that disobeyed not men who asked to be preserved. Confinement, the word hits spines like cold water. A door clangs somewhere, not theirs, yet the sound borrows their distance. Men swallow, some step, some do not. The line becomes a measure of temperature no instrument was built to read. In the mess, a rumor with a new edge. They'll split us up, send us to different outfits, grind us down small. The rumor tastes true because that is how systems undo a circle by turning it into points. Joe doesn't raise his voice. Then our point travels, he says. It goes where we go. He sketches 3 words in the air with a finger no one will remember years later, but everyone will feel in their ribs. Safety, training, respect. The words leak into the next table, then the next, like coffee into bread. An inspection. Sudden a pretext that smells like what it is, a search for a reason to discipline what you cannot convince. Beds flipped, lockers opened. A photograph from home falls, face down, and stays there an extra beat, as if the past needs a second to decide whether it wants to look at this present. Nothing contraband found. Something worse found resolve. The chief notes it and chooses the wrong words. Stubborn. The men choose better words among themselves, alive together, not yet broken. A chaplain asks to speak to the formation, permission granted, but with eyes on him. He tells a story from Scripture about men who refused a fire, about a king who learned the language of heat the hard way. He does not draw the lines for them. He lets the lines draw themselves. When he steps down, an officer whispers in his ear something about proper boundaries. The chaplain nods, looks past the officer, and sees faces turning story into fuel. The line holds not a machine, a living thing. A name is called a man steps out, says after training, steps back. Another name, another answer. When Joe's name comes, he lets the syllables float a second longer than is comfortable for anyone with rank. After training, he says, the day's heat finds his shirt's salt maps its way down his spine. He feels fear the way a man feels rain through a coat, present chilling, not the end of everything. Behind him, one voice, then 2 say the words again, as if they are practice for a choir that doesn't know its song yet. Confinement follows, not yet for the 50, for a handful. They can reach quickly. A show of teeth. Bars don't silence an idea. They give it a room to echo in. From inside, a man hums a line from a Sunday. The sound threads through the corridor, up the stair, into the yard, into the ears of men who are outside and feel inside anyway. An officer barks for quiet. Sound obeys for a minute, then returns to a volume that is hard to write up. The paperwork changes tone, refusal to obey. Possible mutiny. The first time the word lands on a page that will be kept. It looks ugly there, like a stranger wearing your father's jacket. Somewhere higher up, a phone rings, another kind of weather. Men with authority talk into receivers as if the right arrangement of vowels could keep a spark from finding a fuse. They say things like containment, precedent, example. The geometry of consequence begins to draw itself on a wall no one asked to be a map. And yet, even in the shadow of that wall, small bright things. In the yard, Joe finds the new kid, the one whose hands learned where to be, sitting on a crate that says, "Caution," in a font that pretends to be protection. "You still with us?" Joe asks. The kid nods a nod that is older than yesterday. "I keep thinking about the bell," he says, "the one that rang by itself." Joe squints toward the water. Maybe it was warning. Maybe it was memory. He doesn't add the third possibility. Maybe it was a future trying to be heard. Another mini case, a demonstration session finally arranged. Under watchful eyes. Thin, rushed, transactional. An ordnance man talks the deck through 3 points, then is whisked away by a schedule that believes in itself too much. It is not nothing men learn the sound a safe clutch makes. The angle a sling prefers, but the lesson arrives like a dream remembered at noon. Incomplete, slippery vanishing when you most need it. "We asked for air," a sailor mutters. "They gave us a picture of a window." Tension tightens, not loud. Elastic. A reporter shows up at the gate and is turned away. A second reporter tries another gate and gets a sentence he cannot print yet. The town leans closer. Barber chairs tilt. A waitress pours slower. Ears collect fragments. Words like trial example, they're going to make a point. The community knows exactly what a point is when it is made on somebody else's back. Then, the day they try to force the hinge. A formation larger than the yard wants. Officers on crates. Non-coms at the flanks. A truck idling like a threat. Step forward to resume loading. The order comes not shouted, amplified. A voice attached to machinery. A row moves a thin one. Another row does not. The pause lengthens. Becomes a presence you could lean against. A line of eyes finds Joe. He breathes once, the kind of breath that rearranges a man's posture, and says evenly to the officer, "Sir, we will work after training." The sentence is a life raft and a match. The officer's face does 3 small things and then becomes a policy. He reads a charge, he reads a number, he reads the word everyone was avoiding. The air learns a new temperature. It doesn't break, not yet, because breaking would be simpler. It layers. Confinements expand. Names are marked. Groups are separated, recombined, asked again, threatened again. Men make the same answer with the same mouth until the mouth is tired of being brave, and then they borrow another man's breath and answer once more. In a quiet corner, a young sailor writes a note to himself. If I go back, am I brave or broken? He folds the note and puts it where his heart would feel it. A childish gesture that rescues him from feeling childish. Night again, the kind that remembers. The water clicks against piles like a metronome that knows the tempo of fear. Somewhere, a buoy moans a sound. Like a ship remembering how to die. Joe sits on a step with a paper cup of coffee that tastes like a burnt idea, and listens to the bass talk in its sleep generators, whispering, a far door banging, then thinking better of it, a boss deciding which ghosts to bark at. A figure approaches the young lieutenant, hands in pockets, shoulders trying to be wider than his rank. He doesn't sit. He says softly, "They're not going to bend." Joe nods, "Neither are we." The lieutenant looks at the ground, I know. He pauses, the kind of pause a man takes before he steps away from sunlight. Whatever comes, hold your line. Then he is gone like decent weather. By dawn, the choice is no longer a theory, it is a posture. Men stand in 2s and 3s. A sergeant calls them statues to make himself laugh. The laugh does not arrive. The trucks wait, their mouths open dark. The crane cables twitch, impatient or nervous, hard to say which. A new sign has been hung, "Do not loiter," it declares. The irony makes a few throats clear. No one here is loitering. They are deciding together how to teach the Navy a word it thinks it already knows safe. It will get worse before history calls it better. There will be a room with chairs in careful rows. A table where truth will be told, and then weighed, and then measured against words written long before the men who wrote them imagined this day. There will be names 50, and the number will learn to wear a capital letter like a title. There will be a visitor, a lawyer with eyes that know how to turn pages and still see people. But that is ahead. For now, the yard, the pier, the men. The moment of refusal that is not the end of duty, but its beginning correctly defined. The sun climbs. The air warms, time moves like a reluctant mule. An officer steps up again. This time his voice tries to be father and judge and weather. "Last chance," he says. Joe looks at his hands, at the new lines the last week cut there, at the map of labor and loss. He does not look back up when he answers. After training, he says. The words are quiet, final, large. Around him, breath goes out. Then comes in synchronized a choir without melody and with more meaning than any song. Somewhere, perhaps in memory, perhaps in the physics of what men decide together. A bell rings once, and even those who do not believe in omens let the sound pass through them and steady their feet. By late August, the record grows teeth. Memos turn into orders, orders harden into charges. The phrase that hovered like a storm cloud, mutiny, finally reigns. 50 men names aligned in columns that pretend at neatness. A set of bodies reduced to case numbers and articles of war. The venue, a Navy courtroom on the island, bright windows, flags a seal that stares like a clock that never blinks. The boards are swept, the benches polished, the microphones tested until their breath sounds official. Outside the bay, sighs. Inside, the language of consequence clears its throat. Fact now arrives with citations. Article 96, mutiny, refusal of lawful orders with intent to usurp authority. The words are old. Their weight is not. A judge advocate reads in a voice made careful by years' precise commas, sharpened periods. He says refuse to work. He says in concert. He says after warning. He does not say after explosion, after funerals with no bodies. After training that never came. The defense rises, appointed counsel with uniforms pressed into perfect geometry, and asks for what seems small and is not context. Training records, safety instruction logs, prior incidents on the pier. The rate at which tonnage targets rose, as if someone believed speed could replace skill. Objections flare, sustained, overruled, sustained again. The law speaks in hammers. The truth arrives wearing softer shoes. In the gallery, a man whose name will echo later, a lawyer from the NAACP, tall, watchful eyes, measuring not only the testimony, but the temperature of the room. He will not argue today, not in this forum, but he will send words into the country that will make other rooms warm. He listens as a sailor describes the refusal that wasn't refusal, so much as the insistence on a life not given up cheaply. After training, the witness repeats, and the transcript writes it down as if it were a slogan instead of a plea. The prosecutor presses, "You intended to defy." The witness swallows, remembers the night and the bell that rang by itself. "I intended to live." He answers, quiet even, and someone in the back row lets a breath out, as if it had been hiding there since July. Files arrive from warehouses. No one in Dungarees ever saw. Manuals, regulations, memoranda about ordnance, handling paragraphs that if obeyed would have turned fear into procedure. The defense lays them on a table the way you lay tools out before repairing a roof you've been living under without a ladder. Where were these, counsel asks, between the rail yard and the crane? The response is administrative, a river of words that never quite reaches the ocean. Operational tempo, wartime exigencies, on-the-job familiarity. The phrase "on the job" falls like a hammer on a thumb. Witnesses speak of the first platform test, of slings that sang the wrong note, of a crane clutch that bit late and then too hard. A white officer states he warned the men. A black seaman answers he warned the day itself. The stenographer's keys chatter, the pages grow warm under her palms. Across those pages, a pattern emerges. Speed praised caution, mocked quotas, ordered like prayers before dawn. One petty officer's boast, recorded in a different context weeks earlier, enters the record like a shard of mirror. Our division beat the other's tonnage by sundown. The defense holds the sentence up to the light. The prosecution asks that the light be dimmed. The court splits the difference. The line remains but smaller. Outside the courthouse, folklore keeps its own docket. In the barracks, the temporary ones near the alternate pier, men trade stories that have learned since the blast. A new grammar. A worker swears he saw footprints on the rail after midnight, not fresh, not old, salt-silvered, the kind you only see when the fog sits exactly right. Another says a gull dove and refused to land, circling the same square of water until morning, as if guarding a door no one else could find. A third admits a dream, a dock without men. Only voices counting miscounting, then starting again. If a count is wrong, his grandmother used to say, a soul can't settle. He laughs a small embarrassed sound, but he lights a match, lets it burn to his thumbnail, and pinches it out as if reminding the dark who owns fire. Reporters gather fragments. The word mutiny tastes sensational in type it sells papers. It bends ears. But a few lines deeper, something else ripples safety complaints, prior accidents at other depots, the undertraining of segregated divisions who did the hardest work with the thinnest instruction. Headlines argue with each other. Duty in wartime versus justice for workers, and the city breathes that argument and then exhales it into barbershops and streetcars. A barber folds a paper, says to a customer, "They want courage cheap." The customer answers, "Courage ain't wholesale." Inside, the judge's questions sharpen. "Did you mean to overthrow command?" "No, sir." "Did you mean to challenge the order?" "I meant to survive it." Some answers are called evasive. But the courtroom fills with the sense that evasion is not what is happening. Translation is, men are translating fear and hope and the arithmetic of physics into sentences that can live in the mouth without breaking a tooth. The prosecution reads names of those who stepped forward early, exhibits the compliance of a few as proof against the refusal of the many. The defense counters consent under threat is not consent. Stepping forward is not safety. Stepping back is not treason when forward leads to fire. The facts do not stop at the courtroom door. An ordnance officer, gray-templed restless, gives sworn details about proper loading angles, the rated limits of hoists, the training hours recommended before a man touches a live round. The numbers feel crisp, clean laboratory language. Then he says what everyone keeps having to say twice, that most of the black sailors at the pier never saw the last of those pages. Only the crates. A pause, the kind of pause that marks the place where rage might break the surface, if rage had rank. He finishes by saying the word, "No one wants ownership of negligence," and the prosecution objects to the scope. The court sustains. The word remains in the air like smoke long after the window is closed. Folklore deepens not to replace fact, to rhyme with it. In the chapel, a woman from town who lost a cousin when the pier lit the sky leaves 2 candles, one for the dead, one for the living who refused. She hums not the sorrowful hymn, but a marching one. The candle flames tilt as if paying attention. A stevedore from the rail yard off duty stops at the waterline and talks to the tide. "Carry the names right, don't blur them." He scrapes a small circle in the wet sand, a dumb ritual. And yet when he steps away, the circle stays as if the water agreed. Verdict day, air pressed flat against the windows. Paper cut sharp enough to shave. Guilty. Guilty. Guilty, the repetition lands without drama, because drama would make it seem less permanent. Sentences, years that taste like forever when measured in nights. A soft sound rolls through the benches, not weeping. Something like a ship's wood shifting under new load. The men stand one by one. They do not shout. They do not bow. Joe. Our Joe looks at the judge like a man measuring the width of a river he already knows he will cross. In the hallway, a reporter scribbles and shakes his head, not at the refusal, at the scale. The NAACP man steps out into light and names the proceedings what they felt like a miscarriage, and names the truth he intends to push uphill. This is about race and safety and the country's promise to its own. Fact travels faster after a verdict. Letters to the department, statements to the press, appeals drafted with commas placed like girders. Outside the Navy's fence, citizens petition, ministers preach. Unions whisper solidarity, though wartime makes such whispers dangerous. A senator's office receives 30 telegrams in a day. A clerk reads them, startled by how many end with scripture. Inside the fence, men pack for confinement, hands doing small tasks precisely because the world just became indefinite. A guard opens a door and finds two sailors straightening the corners of their blankets. He stares at their hands at the care and experiences a moment in which categories unstick. It passes. His keys still jingle the same way. The folklore of the 50 becomes a rumor with a backbone. On buses, the phrase, Port Chicago 50 is said in the tone usually reserved for county names, places where something heavy happened. Children in the neighborhood add a game they do not understand. The origin of one child stands on a chalk square and refuses to move until the others finish saying a long sentence. The sentence changes every time, but it always ends with a promise. In kitchens, women salt food and refuse to say accident when avoidance would have been possible. On Sundays, a visiting preacher draws a line on a chalkboard no one else can see and says, "There are fires we must enter, and fires we must not be asked to walk into without a hand to hold and a path to walk." Meanwhile, the Navy calculates as institutions must. Manpower shortages, optics, the spread of a narrative in which duty meets dignity and learns a new shape. Transfers are arranged, sentences later commuted. The bureaucratic way of saying a thing was wrong without writing wrong, where history will read it first. The men are moved. Some return to non-munitions duty. Some kept inside longer than any lesson could justify. Years will pass before a clean word meets the record. Decades before a pardon touches one man's hands like a letter with the stamp finally right side up. But the arc at the thing that bends when enough names push has begun its slow work. Across this, the folklore layer refuses to be quiet. Not because it craves attention, but because it is how communities carry truths that paper cannot shoulder alone. Night fishermen claim some evenings the water near the ruined pilings turns the color of brass just before moonrise. They do not tell this to tourists. A former crane operator, long retired, sets out a second plate at dinner on July 17th. No one eats from it. It is for balance. A line of song migrates into a new hymn, "Guide me, O thou great." But somewhere in the second verse in certain churches, a pause appears, a rest long enough to remember names. We return to the desk, to the files, to the slow courage of ink. A memo higher up admits the obvious segregation has placed black sailors in roles of greatest danger with least preparation. Another proposes integration of units as an efficiency, the safest way to tell a truth if you are power call justice a tool. A signature appears beneath language that inches forward. People will trace that signature later to a larger order that tells a whole military to learn a new sentence, a sentence with together in it. Between here and there, men carry years in their ribs. And Joe, not just a name now, a face in the imagination's ledger works, when work is a thing that can be done without the old lie attached. He writes to someone at home about weather and patience. He does not mention the dreams of bells ringing by themselves, of a dock that refuses to be a grave, of a line of men walking at night by the water, unhurried, unafraid, nodding to each other as if counting were no longer necessary. When he wakes, he sits at the window until dawn says the new day is here, and he believes it. Facts finally stack into a bridge, explosions measured, testimony weighed, training pages that should have been thumbed long before the pier learned to burn. Folklore finally threads itself through the bridge's cables, omens, song, rituals that kept men human while the papers argued about definitions. The two layers do not cancel each other, they harmonize. One keeps the other from floating. The other keeps the first from hardening into brittle law. Listen, the bay still breathes. Somewhere a buoy moans. Somewhere else a choir finds the note it lost in smoke. The record amended in time will say what it can. The stories amended in hearts will say the rest. And when the next order arrives, wherever it arrives, there will be men and women who, remembering the 50, the pier the night that found a second sun, will shape their mouths around a sentence that sounds like safety, learning its own name. We will work, after training. There is a way a story tightens. Not by growing louder, but by drawing its threads through the same small eye. Again and again, until fabric appears where there was only string. The courtroom empties. The bay exhales. The files take on the weight of signatures and stamps, and yet what matters does not stay put. It travels, down corridors, into kitchens, across pulpits and union halls, into a boy's notebook, where he writes in a hand, still learning itself a sentence that sounds like a promise. We will not lift fire bare-handed again. Bridge backward, bridge forward, that's how truth crosses water. Backward to July, the pier, the light that rose like a second sun. Forward to rooms where men who never stood on that wood decide what safety will mean tomorrow. Somewhere between those rooms, a hallway with scuffed paint, a black sailor in dungarees, passes a white ensign with perfect creases, both pretending not to notice the other's gravity. Somewhere else, a lawyer traces the path from refusal to review with a finger that is turned pointing into prayer. The map of this story is not neat. It looks like veins. Joe writes home. He uses the small words first. Weather chow, the price of a postcard. Then, because small words can't carry certain weights, he places 3 larger ones where his mother will see them and circle them with her breath. Safety training respect. He does not name the courtroom. He does not name the sentence. He names the work he believes the country still owes its own. He folds the letter, seals it, presses the flap with a thumb gone rough. The envelope feels heavier than it is, as if the paper remembers the dock and keeps a little ash for ballast. And the bridge to Harlem, yes, loud, glad Harlem, where a reporter at a black paper reads a wire, rubs his eyes, and hears in the legalese a rhythm he recognizes from marching feet on Lenox Avenue. He turns jargon into ink that can be read by men on lunch break, by women at the sink, by a kid on a stoop who mouths the words just to hear how they taste. The headline does not say heroes, does not say saints. It says workers, it says men. It says what the country too often forgets to say out loud: equal. On another table, a union bulletin lists accidents at ports nationwide, small type long list, then asks a question that refuses to sit down. What is a lawful order if it asks a man to ignore physics? The bridge to Pulpit's oak, worn smooth by hands stained by decades of questions. A pastor in Oakland walks to the edge of a sentence and decides to keep going. Shadrach, Meshach, Abednego. The old story, the furnace, the refusal. He lets the names ring like iron in a forge, then sets them next to new names. Western Shore names, names that still smell of salt. The church hums, pews creak, a baby sighs. A widow nods to the invisible, and the old fire learns a modern word. Training. God did not ask them to be fools, the pastor says soft. He asked them to be faithful. The room reads the difference. Meanwhile, in an office with quiet carpet, a colonel studies numbers, tonnage, schedules gaps, and thinks what he is not supposed to say. That a system which needs men to risk death to meet a quota is a system designed backwards. He signs a memo that suggests redistributing certain duties, expanding instruction, adjusting the pace. He does not use the word justice, he writes efficiency. The memo travels further for having chosen the disguise. Elsewhere, another paper argues an opposite virtue. With equal calm, maintain discipline, it says, examples deter. Between the two papers lives the country's conscience arguing with itself in footnotes. Climax is not always a crash. Sometimes it is a reading. A night is chosen not by ceremony, but by convenience. A night when the air hangs still and the bass sounds like power asleep. Men gather, not many, just enough for the human voice to carry without a microphone. Someone brings a crate for a lectern. Someone brings a pencil to keep a list honest. Someone else brings a silence that will not break at the wrong time. Joe holds a sheet the latest roster from an office that learned the phrase "fate unknown" and writes it like a bookkeeping term. He looks at the first line, inhales once, and begins. Names, slow, careful, each one with the gravity the bay could not give back. A pause between syllables long enough for a face to arrive. Van Buren, Lewis, Richardson. Names with rivers in them, with cities with histories that do not fit on paper. He reads. Others answer, present a word of the living applied to the gone. It is not theology, it is repair. With each name, the night remembers a little less of its worst hour. With each name, the men remember a little more of themselves, not as bodies in a chain, but as keepers of an oath, older than any order, we will carry each other's weight. Then the list turns a column of words that should not exist on a roster. Fate unknown. Fate unknown. Fate unknown. The pencil on the crate trembles. The hand holding it steadies. Someone not sure who whispers, not unknown. Not to us. Joe stops, lets the air measure the sentence, then continues reading those two words with the same respect he gave the names. Because even the absence must be held carefully, or it will spill into everything. The sound at the edge of the yard, a bell maybe, or a buoy, or the way metal cools after a long day of pretending to be invincible rings once. No one jokes. No one calls it an omen. The ring is part of the reading punctuation that the world supplies when the mouth runs out. The men who weeks ago said after training, now stand in the space that sentence built, a space where grief is not a private chore and courage is measured not by noise, but by how long you can hold a name without dropping it. Bridge to Washington, a hallway brighter than the sun walls that echo with papers more than with voices. A man in a suit not cut for lifting walks with a folder tucked like a Bible. Inside letters, clippings, telegrams that read like prayer and policy combined. He will place the folder on a desk and say words that have been said in other centuries with other uniforms. Sir, the future is watching. The desk will not answer, but the room will remember, and rooms that remember are dangerous to habits that harm. Inside the fence, a chaplain opens a ledger he keeps for himself, not for the Navy. On one page, the story of a young sailor who sat with fear and did not let fear choose for him. On the next, a verse about walking through fire and not being unmade. He writes a line at the bottom that feels too simple and is therefore exactly right. Courage is not the absence of orders, it is the presence of limits. He closes the book as if closing a wound. The climax folds in on a single conversation, too small. Plain a corner of a yard, the young lieutenant and Joe again. The air smells like machine oil and something sweet from the marsh. They will not say they were wrong, the lieutenant admits. Not now. Maybe not ever. Joe nods. They don't have to say it for us to know it. They have to stop repeating it. The lieutenant half smiles. A weary, grateful thing. You changed me, he says, then looks away, because men trained to command are not trained to tell the truth that clean. We changed each other, Joe answers, and the sentence lands with a gentleness the trial never found. Then the image this story has been walking toward. A quiet night, a sliver of moon, the black water quilting itself back together. A shore path no one patrols after taps. Footsteps unhurried, unafraid, a line of them. Not in boots you can count, not in bodies that block the light, but in the sense a place develops when names are properly kept. Call it folklore if you like. The word is not an insult here. Men have said, careful men, sane men, that some nights by the ruined pilings you can hear cadence low, the soft hut. 2, of a drill no officer ordered, of a march, no schedule printed. They say, if you stand very still, if you let your own breath find the old tempo, the sound passes through you and leaves something behind, not fear, not thrill, alignment. They still march at night. That's how the story tells itself. And that line is not about ghosts who refuse to leave it, is about the living refusing to forget. It is about the 50 who refused fire without teaching about the 300 whose names require careful mouths, about the thousands who went back to work in other ports because someone had to, and because the nation's need did not end just because one peer learned the language of light. The march is memory doing what training should have done, keeping steps, even keeping hands where they will not be broken. Keeping eyes on each other so no one is left behind. Bridge finally to a paper signed, years later, a different president, a different season, instructing a military to unlearn the line it drew through itself. The text is dry, its commas obedient, but if you put your ear to it, you can hear the pier, the courtroom, the yard. You can hear the small breath a man takes before he says no to the wrong thing, in order to say yes to the right one. You can hear a bell faint ringing once then, once again, as if punching a soft time clock on behalf of the dead and the living both. In the last minutes of this night before we step into aftermath and echo, we return to the list. Joe folds the paper, places it back in a pocket that used to carry a ration of cigarettes. His hands, still, for the first time today. Around him, men murmur the final present. Present, present, as if tucking the names in. The air cools, the water briefly forgets to move. And here, where a story might have settled for sorrow, something steadier arrives, not victory, not absolution, resolve. The kind that walks forward slower, wiser, and demands the simple arithmetic of dignity. Count us as you count your shells. Train us as you tune your cranes. Hold us as you hold your ships. And if you cannot do that, we will stand shoulder to shoulder and teach you how. They break the circle, not with haste, with care. A man touches the crate, the makeshift lectern twice, not superstition, gratitude. Another tips his cap to the bay, though there is no one to see. Joe looks once toward the pilings, the place where light learned to lie, and then toward the barracks, where morning will find him anyway. He does not expect omens, he expects work. But as he turns, something like cadence brushes the gravel, a rhythm too old to be new, too new to be myth, and the night honest at last lets them pass. Morning came, and kept coming. Long after the headlines changed fonts and the uniforms changed cuts. The pier did not return, not the way it had been, but the water learned to look calm again, the way a face looks calm when it is practiced. On shore, men finished sentences in places built for finishing. Others went back to work in places where the crane sang a safer note, and a country slow as tide began to say a new sentence with fewer stumbles. Train them, protect them, count them. Files thickened, then thinned, then were boxed and labeled and stored where temperature does not rise the way tempers do. A memo climbed a ladder of signatures until it could see a horizon, the one where separation would be called inefficiency and integration would be called policy. And somewhere much later, justice would introduce itself without clearing its throat. In classrooms with maps pinned too close to the windows, a teacher wrote Port Chicago in chalk. Half the room heard a place, the other half a story. By the bell, more of them heard both. Mothers grew old, and then older. And some lived to open envelopes with language that sounded like the government learning to apologize, not enough, not on time, but not nothing. One man, years from the night the bay turned to fire, stood in a room where a seal glittered on a wall, and felt a weight lift the precise amount a word can weigh when removed from a record. He kept the paper in a drawer where he also kept pictures of men who did not get to be old enough to use a second drawer. A chaplain learned to preach softer and truer. He set the furnace story next to a new liturgy, the liturgy of training schedules and safety briefings, and a supervisor saying, "Stop, this can wait for daylight." In certain ships, the ones whose captains understood how memory keeps a vessel off the rocks, Port Chicago became a phrase you could say in a meeting to change the mood, from haste to care. A petty officer who once measured his worth in tonnage learned to measure it in returns, how many men's hands went home, the same shape they left. On July evenings, the river remembers on purpose. At the memorial, a shape of concrete and letters, footsteps slow without being asked. Hats come off without command. Families lean toward the names the way flowers lean into light, not to be dramatic. To warm a syllable that ran cold in an office long ago. A ranger tells the story cleanly, kindly, and when the part comes where the list says unknown, he does not let his voice stumble. He lets it rest. And in the rest, you can hear other voices, the ones that did not get microphones. In Harlem, where the presses once turned refusal into headline thunder, a grandson reads those clippings in a digitized archive and finds two things he did not expect: a familiar last name, and the smell of hot ink coming off a screen that has no smell. He texts his mother a photo, a short line, "It wasn't just a rumor, Ma." In Oakland, a choir folds a pang into harmony. A director old enough to have known a man who knew a man slows the second verse until the word guide feels like something you can hold in both hands. Folklore keeps doing the work that facts cannot finish. Not because facts fail, because breath is needed where dates live. On a quiet night, a security guard at the waterline hears cadence where there is no formation and decides not to be afraid. He takes off his cap, nods once toward the pilings, and says out loud, "As you were." The wind answers like a joke told by a careful friend. Far down the coast, a retired crane operator keeps a small ritual on the 17th. He opens a manual to the page where the sling is drawn correctly. He taps the diagram twice. He closes the book and feels his chest loosen the way a knot loosens when it has been told it can. The Navy, this living arguing thing, wrote new chapters where the old ones left blanks. Some changes came as checklists, some as briefings, some as the slow goodbye to a line drawn through men's lives. None of it arrived as quickly as it should have, but it arrived carried by people who learned the grammar of insistence from sailors who said after training and did not drown in the laughter that followed. Those people, officers, stewards, chiefs, clerks, carried a sentence across decades without letting it drop. A lawful order cannot ask a man to forget physics or dignity. And Joe, not the only one, not even the loudest one, grew into a life that looked ordinary from far away and precise up close. He worked, he married, he mourned. He laughed in rooms where laughter could finally stay until the end of the joke. He kept a folded list in a drawer, not to reopen a wound, to unforget a debt. Some nights he woke at the bell. He still heard far, faint, faithful, and walked to a window just to be sure the world had not lit itself wrong again. Each time he found it dark, honest, survivable. He breathed, forgave what he could, and saved what he couldn't for mornings that needed it. In the decades that followed, students with podcast mics and scholars with footnotes, sailors with grease under their nails, and pastors with ink on their cuffs all wrote their version of the same promise. A law student traced the case and found her voice bending around a single question. Who gets to decide what courage looks like? A dock worker in another port put his palm on a coil of rope and told a rookie, "Listen, this thing has a language, learn it before it learns you." A mother long past the age when grief stops aging placed a photograph on a mantel and said, "He was necessary." The word changed the room. If you go, and you should stand a moment longer than the program suggests. Watch the water practice being calm. Read the names the way you would read instructions that matter. If a train horn floats across the flats, let it pass through you. And if you hear cadence under the ordinary noises, don't argue with it. Some music is history doing what it was built to do, keep time for those who must work by night. We promised at the beginning to return to the image that would not leave the light that rose like a second sun. The bell that rang, though no hand, pulled a young sailor squaring his shoulders in a world suddenly too bright. We have returned not for spectacle, for alignment. What began as rupture has become a rhythm. The ledger that failed has been amended by names read aloud, by rules written properly, by people who understood that duty without safety is not duty. It is a dare thrown at a grave. If you're watching at home, before you go tell us where you are, and the exact minute you joined, and what held you. Was it a name? A bell? A sentence you want your own work to answer? Leave it in the comments so others can stand beside you there. A kind of formation digital and real at once. The bay breathes. Evening settles. The concrete remembers on behalf of the wood that could not. Somewhere a ship's whistle salutes a shore it will leave at dawn. Somewhere else a child finishes a school report and writes the last line twice, not because she forgot, because she wanted to feel the words land, train them, protect them, count them. And in the ordinary dark that follows honest survivable, you might hear a soft cadence far off fading only because it trusts you to carry the beat.